Hello and welcome to The Last Word. Once again, former Army Chief General V.K. Singh is at the centre of a controversy. But this time, the key question is different. Has he become an embarrassment to the Army, or is he being unfairly treated? That's with former Army Chief General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, the chairman of the ex-servicemen's movement and former Deputy Chief Lieutenant General Raj Kadian, and former Defence Secretary Ajay Prasad. Unfortunately, General V.K. Singh himself was unwilling to join this discussion. General Kadian, let's start with the incident at General V.K. Singh's residence on Saturday, when an army major came to disconnect a special army telephone exchange, which the former army chief was no longer entitled to. How do you respond to the way the major, a serving officer in uniform, was treated?
Karan, first of all, let me say that this was a very minor incident that has acquired unwanted public visibility, which could have been avoided. Secondly, unfortunately, General V.K. Singh continues to court controversy, one after the other, where not only the army's image is hurt, but I think more than that, his own public standing and his high public visibility might be damaged. Now, coming to this incident. Normally, a government servant, when he retires, he is allowed to retain government accommodation and telephone facility for 3 months. General V.K. Singh has got permission to retain government accommodation on his own request for 1 year. But the telephone was not permitted after 3 months, or certain facilities which were provided, like the exchange. But it is out of respect for a retired chief that the army has continued to give this facility, as I look at it, for nearly 8 months. And this major went on a very legitimate duty to disconnect that exchange and put the line direct and withdraw the 2 men. He was in uniform, he went in broad daylight, he identified himself. And of course, as the media reports say, that the daughter allowed him to carry on. If the daughter had any doubt, she could have rung up the commanding officer of the officer, look, this officer has come, is it on authorized duty? As far as the authorization writing is concerned, let me explain that these houses in the cantonment are very old, and wholly there is a stream of maintenance people, the technician, the electrician, the plumber, they keep coming, nobody brings any authorization. And this officer himself is a class 1 gazetted officer. What more authorization does one want?
Let me quote from the Indian Express of Sunday. The paper says, and I'm quoting, "The main gates were locked from outside to prevent the major from leaving, and the doors of the house were locked from inside to prevent him from coming in." In other words, he was converted into a trapped animal, and that too on one of the coldest days of the year, and left in the garden for 6 hours. Is that how a major should be treated by a retired army chief's family?
Karan, not at all. This is not at all in the army's character, army's culture, or the ethos. And it is a pity that General himself was not there. Otherwise, I am sure it would not have happened. But even the families are normally sensitized how to treat a brother officer. Not the way that the media says he has been treated. Very unfortunate.
General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, now General Vikram Singh's family says that they were not given any advance intimation of Major Vikram's arrival. And secondly, they feared that he had come to install a bugging device. That was a formal statement made on their behalf by their lawyer on television. But does that justify detaining a serving army major in uniform for 6 hours and then calling the media as if they had caught a spy?
I think the whole incident has to be started off from the beginning and put in its correct perspective. I think what Raj Kadian said just now brings out the facts of the case. General V.K. Singh was treated as a security category Z, which goes on for 3 months, that is 90 days. At the end of the 90 days, now during these 90 days, he is authorized a telephone and an exchange. And the exchange has to be manned by 2 to 3 Army Signal Corps personnel. At the end of whenever those 90 days were up, I am not very clear about the dates, but should have been around maybe November, December. The army came along, the signals people came along to remove that exchange, and they didn't suddenly turn up out of the blue. The army does not function like that, especially when it relates to one of its former chiefs. Somebody must have, and this fact is there. I do not believe it could have been otherwise. Somebody must have rung up the general's family, the former chief's family, to say, "Madam, we are sending these people, please to come and remove the telephone."
Can I interrupt at that point, sir? You're making a very important point.
Yes.
You're saying that you do not believe and accept that Major Vikram turned up without advance intimation. You're saying someone undoubtedly would have rung up to say he was coming.
Yes, I think so, that being a former chief's family in residence, even though the chief was not, the former chief was not there, it is common courtesy and they do it. And even if they had not rung up, this major, when he came, he would not have been left standing in the garden, I can assure you. He would have been invited in. He would have been, I suppose, as we all do in our normal lives.
Forgive me.
You know,
permit me another interruption. Are you saying the major would have been invited in, or are you saying he should have been invited in? Because the Indian Express makes it crystal clear that he was left standing outside the house, presumably in the garden, for 6 hours. That's in the Indian Express.
I think the media must get its own facts right as to what the culture of the army is. Because this officer, having come and having, even if he had not, he must have conveyed it to the general's ADC. I believe he has an ADC too, a Subedar Major, I'm given to understand.
Okay.
Who was and who then confirmed from the former chief's family, General V.K. Singh's family, that so and so is coming, and he entered to remove that exchange. This was because that his security category had expired.
Let's move away from the actual facts, because the facts have been clarified. Let me ask you a quick last question before I move on, General Roy Chaudhary. Do you believe that calling the media, and not just one channel, but I believe all the channels that could be called, and making a little bit of a tamasha out of this, was the right way for the V.K. Singh family to respond?
I will not comment on that. It involves an officer's family. But the word that you use, it turned into a tamasha. Other than that, I will not like to comment on this last aspect of your question.
All right. But it is very interesting that you agree with the choice of the word I use, that it turned into a tamasha. Mr. Ajay Prasad, on the other hand, given the fraught state of relationship between General V.K. Singh and his successor, the present Army Chief, General Bikram Singh, and the fact that General V.K. Singh had tried, or so the press have reported, to stop General Bikram Singh succeeding him, do you think it was a serious lapse not to have sent advance intimation? And here I am accepting the point made by General V.K. Singh's family that no advance intimation was sent, and I'm disregarding the view expressed just now by General Roy Chaudhary that undoubtedly intimation would have been sent. So if no intimation was sent, do you think that was a serious lapse that justifies to some extent the way they responded to Major Vikram?
No, I don't think so at all. These are small matters, and every time an officer retires, some of the perks, some of the facilities that are attributed and given as a part of the service conditions are usually withdrawn. And normal courtesy is that somebody rings up and tells you that, look, we will be coming and we would be removing this equipment or this exchange or something. But even if that was not done for some omission, the fact that a senior officer, an army major, comes with due credentials, then I don't think it's such a big deal, and too much should not be read into interpersonal problems between the successor and the predecessor.
So can I interrupt and put this to you? Are you therefore suggesting that the response that Major Vikram received from General Vikram Singh's family was inappropriate, and that a retired army chief's family should have treated a serving army major in uniform differently?
I would certainly feel so. You know, even leave aside the army protocol or the army discipline, But if somebody comes to your house and says, I have come for this purpose, you treat him politely, you treat him with courtesy, and let him do his job, and not sort of lock him out in the cold and like this.
Quite true.
I think this was quite an inappropriate response.
Let's widen the discussion a little, General Kadian. The lawyer speaking on behalf of General Vikram Singh, sorry, on behalf of General VK Singh, I must be careful about both of them because they are both got the same surname, made it crystal clear on television that they suspected that the army major was attempting to bug General VK Singh's house. In other words, what they were suggesting is not that an army major alone was seeking to bug the house, but the army signal unit itself was seeking to bug the home of a former chief. Is that a credible accusation for a retired chief to make against an institution he served for almost 40 years?
Karan, we must remember that the statement has come from the lawyer. And lawyers are known to exaggerate things a great deal. I personally find this statement as preposterous and very laughable. If the general's line actually had to be tapped, you can do it more easily in the exchange. Why do you have to come to the house?
In which case, if the statement is made by the lawyer and you're suggesting that perhaps not a reflection of General VK Singh's own views, shouldn't General VK Singh clarify that he doesn't endorse the accusation his lawyers made?
Oh, I don't know whether he has clarified or he's felt the need.
So far, he has not.
If he's not, then I personally don't believe a word of what the lawyer has said.
General Roy Chaudhary, the irony is that the technical support division set up by General VK Singh when he was army chief was itself accused by the press of attempting to bug offices in the defense ministry. And as you may have read in the papers, that technical support division, after an inquiry conducted by General Bikram Singh, is now due to be disbanded. So in the light of that background, do you think this new accusation or suspicion that Major Vikram was there to try and bug General VK Singh's house is a case of the pot calling the kettle black?
No. I think what can I say? The whole thing is utterly laughable. It's a straightforward case. This major from the signals went to the former chief's place on instructions, I'm sure, from his unit that the telephone has to be removed because the Z category security has expired. Telephone means exchange. The telephone remains. Please clarify that to your audience. The telephone is not being removed. It is only the exchange and the operators. So that should be made very clear. There is no discourtesy intended, certainly not by any major. And I wonder why the outer gate was locked. That is certainly
Can I interrupt and ask you a question, sir? If there is no courtesy intended and if there was no wrongdoing on the part of the major, then does the army have anything to apologize to General VK Singh?
Well, the army certainly should apologize, because that is part of our culture again, to the family.
Okay.
To Mrs. VK Singh, whose husband was the Chief of Army Staff. And he is a retired Chief of Army Staff.
What is the army apologizing to her for? What is the army apologizing to her for?
The army was apologizing for any misunderstandings or any, any hurt feelings. That's all. It's just plain courtesy. That's all. That's the way we live.
Okay, the apology is a courtesy rather than actually an apology for a wrongdoing. Let's take a break at that point. And when we come back, I'm going to begin with Mr. Ajay Prasad and ask him, has General VK Singh's behavior, both after his retirement and also when he was Army Chief itself, cast a shadow over the army? That's in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to The Last Word. We're discussing what I call the latest General VK Singh controversy. Mr. Ajay Prasad, sadly, This is not the first controversy the retired army chief has got caught up in after his retirement. Last year in October, General VK Singh threatened to gherao Parliament. He even called for the dissolution of Parliament. How do you view his behavior since his retirement?
You see, during the last few months of his tenure, situation had started deteriorating rather badly. And one had really hoped at that time that with his retirement, these controversies would come to an end. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to happen. And one after another, some new issue comes up. Now, I think certainly, General VK Singh, after retirement, has his full rights to take up any activism or join any movement or anything. I'm just not disputing that. But at the same time, what kind of signals is he sending to the Jawans, to the younger officers? I think he's creating a fair amount of confusion in the minds of the rank and file of the army. Okay. And certainly this is not enhancing the prestige of the army, either in the eyes of the army personnel or in the eyes of the general public.
Let me pick up on that last thought from Mr. Ajay Prasad. Is there a danger, General Qadian, that General VK Singh is becoming an embarrassment for the army?
Karan, I wouldn't call it embarrassment. Army is too big an organization, too strong the roots to be upset by these single incidents. Yes, it does cause a little damage to the image of the army. But army as an institution, the strength is not going to be.
But you are saying that General VK Singh's behavior has caused a little damage to the image of the army.
Yeah, army comes in negative publicity. So that is the damage to the image. I mean, all this media reports being published, half from VK Singh's side, half from the army side. So a normal reader would tend to believe some portion of it. That is the damage to the image.
In other words, you're saying this is the last sort of story serving officers or retired officers, for that matter, would want to read about the army or the army chief.
Certainly. And even the Jawans, today they are very discerning. The more of these incidents take place, it is going to hurt more than the army. General VK Singh's own standing in the society and
General VK Singh has damaged his own standing.
Yes, he would. He has and he would if such incidents continue.
General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, as a former army chief, do you think General VK Singh has cast a shadow over the office of army chief, both by the way he handled his own date of birth controversy whilst he was in office, and now by his behavior after his retirement?
General VK Singh has been the Chief of Army Staff. The Army holds its chiefs in very high esteem. And I think General VK Singh's story has one point. When a chief retires, he should be very careful what profession he takes up.
That is a very poignant and, if I might add, loaded bit of advice. A chief, when he retires, should be very careful about what profession he takes up. You're suggesting, aren't you, General Shankar Roy Chaudhary, that that care and that responsibility was not shown by General VK Singh?
I am not suggesting that. I am not suggesting that. I am sure that responsibility was, but politics, once you enter politics, you never know which way you are being thrown. That is my point, that when chief retires or any officer retires, he is carrying a bit of the army with him.
Quite right. When any
and he
chief...
has to be sure whatever he does, nothing should tarnish the army, in any way.
I think those are famous words that bear repetition, so if you'd forgive me, I'll repeat them for the audience. When a chief retires, he carries a bit of the army with him, and he should always be careful that he doesn't do anything that tarnishes the image of the army. We need to ask ourselves very carefully, has General VK Singh breached that advice, be it inadvertently or be it deliberately? My thanks to all three of my guests for joining me. And on this somber note, we end today's show. Goodbye. Good night. Good night.